Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the Chief Economist of Moody's Analytics, and today it's a special podcast. We're going to be talking about the threat posed by cyber risk, and the macroeconomy. And of course, I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Ryan Sweet, the Director of Real-Time Economics, and Chris Dorides. Chris is the Deputy Chief Economist. And we're also joined by three of our colleagues from the rating agencies, Moody's Investor Service. And so this is a special podcast. It's the first podcast, I think, where we've had both folks from Moody's Analytics and MIS together. Because of that, it's important to recognize that that the folks from MIS may have different views than those from Moody's Analytics. That's us. And the views expressed by guests from one company or division within the Moody's family can't be attributed or shouldn't be attributed to other companies or divisions. It's also, I think, important for me to say that, by listening to this podcast or downloading it, you are agreeing to Moody's legal terms and conditions that's found at moodys.com/disclaimer, including any information provided is not information or financial advice, and that Moody's will not be liable for losses arising from your use of the information. I mean, clearly this is language that's necessary in the context of this podcast, where we're going to have folks from both MIS and Moody's Analytics. And I do think this highlights one of the very special things about the Moody's Corporation, that just shows the very talented group of folks that we have there. So with that, let me bring in our guests from MIS and begin with Jim Hempstead. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about how you landed where you are today?
Sure. Thanks a lot. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of your weekly podcast. I very much enjoy watching the three of you, and I agree, great talent on that podcast that you do every week. But I manage the North American.
Oh, Jim, this is really important. Jim, this is important. Which of the three do you like the most? That's the key question.
I'll let you know at the end of the statistics game.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Very good. Okay.
But Mark, I'm part of the project and infrastructure finance team here at Moody's. We, on a global basis, rate a little over $3 trillion of debt in the electric utility, gas, midstream, water and wastewater sectors. And we have a lot of municipal and other infrastructure sectors like airports, seaports, and toll roads. I manage the North American portfolio. And I also manage a small team, and we've got Lesley Ritter and Leroy Terrelonge with us on a cyber group inside the rating agency. So our job is not to manage Moody's Corporation cybersecurity, but what we are trying to do is raise the knowledge and the awareness of our 1,300 global credit analysts, so that when a cyber event affects one of the rated entities that we work with, we could respond more authoritatively and have better engagement with the marketplace by doing that. And this all really came about back in 2015, I would say, when the utility industry was doing a lot of introspection on their cybersecurity capabilities. And I started to have a conversation with our Chief Information Security Officer for Moody's Corporation as a way of starting to learn more about it. And we've really grown over the last bunch of years as a result of that.
Did you say how many years you've been with the Moody's, Jim?
I've been at Moody's since 2002. So
2002.
Well, about 20 years now. And prior to that, I was in the investment banking sector. I started out at
Fantastic.
firms. I did a run through Smith Barney, Solomon Smith Barney, and then also Merrill Lynch for the first 12 years. All in the infrastructure sector.
Got it. And Lesley Ritter also is joining us from MIS, the rating agency. It's good to have you, Lesley.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Lesley Ritter. I've been with the firm for 10 years now, almost 10 years, and working for Jim for almost 10 years. So I started out really as a credit analyst in the electric utility and natural gas pipeline space. Prior to that, I was doing work at GE Energy Financial Services. So we underwrote different power deals all around the world. And at that time, we never talked about cyber. But since joining the team with Jim, we started a discussion, like you said, in 2015, thinking about cyber and how it would impact our companies. And we realized that we really hadn't thought that through so much, and we wanted to know more. And over time, we built our team and created our own cyber team, I think 2019. And I've been there since. So it's been really fascinating, and I'm really thrilled to be here today.
Oh, so you've been working with Jim for 10 years.
I know. Hence all the gray hair.
Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. Good. Hey, and we also have Leroy Terrelonge. Good to have you, Leroy.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'm, I guess, the junior member of the team, or one of the junior members of the team. I've only been at Moody's for 3 years, since 2019, when the cyber risk group sort of had its formal inception. And my background is I started working as a language analyst for the National Security Agency, and then ended up sort of falling into cybersecurity and really becoming very interested in sort of the links with financial performance. I did a Master of International Business degree, and then when the opportunity at Moody's opened up, I was like, wow, I mean, how many opportunities are there to have cyber expertise and then also, you know, marry that with financial performance? And so, yeah, I've loved the past 3 years that I've been here.
You said you were a language what?
A language analyst.
Analyst for the NSA?
That's correct. Yeah, I speak Persian Farsi.
No way. Really?
Oh, yeah.
Did you know I'm Zandy's is a Persian name? Yeah, of course you knew that. You didn't know that.
I know that.
You guessed it. Oh, okay. Yeah. You know what? I'm disappointed to say, but I don't know Farsi. You know, when my dad came over from Iran, he was a student, and at that time the philosophy was that you needed to be an American. You had to speak English. You should not speak the language from wherever you came. So I don't unfortunately know Farsi. It's such a beautiful language.
Absolutely.
And difficult, right? That's a very hard language to learn, I believe.
I think the difficulty comes to the writing. Learning the writing is probably the hardest part, but speaking, like you said, it's very beautiful, and it has a lot of traits that it shares with other Indo-European languages, like English. So it's not so hard on the speaking front.
Do you know any poems? Because my dad, all he does all day long is recite poems in Farsi.
I do, but I don't know if I can recite any for you.
Pomegranates and recite poetry. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know any poems?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I do really like Iranian poetry, but you put me on the spot here. I'm feeling
No. Okay. No. And Iranian food, right? I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah, every year, a new tradition for my family. We don't have any, birth links to Iran, but my husband and I, we have an annual Nowruz, Persian New Year party, and we eat lots of great Iranian food.
Okay, well, it's so good to have you. It's really a pleasure to have all of you, and thank you for spending some time with us. So again, the purpose of the conversation is to get a better grip on cyber risk. Of course, we're macroeconomists, so we're really curious if there's any nexus between cyber and the macroeconomy, but obviously there's a lot of in between companies and governments and everything else, individuals, everything that's going on. So maybe we should just level set and talk about what is cyber risk. What are some examples of the threats posed by cyber? Leroy, you want to kind of lead us down that path a little bit?
Sure. It's good to have an idea of what a cyber attack is, because you hear about that all the time in the news, and it may not be clear for listeners what they should expect when they hear about cyber attacks. So basically, a cyber attack is anything that impacts what we call the CIA triad. It's not the Central Intelligence Agency. It's not the Culinary Institute of America. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And what that means is confidentiality, think data that people shouldn't have access to, or at least unauthorized access to. You want to keep that data secret. So a data breach like the cyber attack against Equifax in 2017, that would be an example of something that's affecting confidentiality. On the integrity front, you want to make sure that the data that you have is accurate, it hasn't been changed or manipulated. And so one example of an attack against integrity was in 2014, attackers were able to change the election results for the Ukrainian election, and they figured that out 40 minutes before they were supposed to announce the election results. Yeah, so they caught it in time. They're able to, fix that. But that's an example of an attack against integrity. And then lastly is availability, and that's making sure that you are able to access the information you have in a timely manner. So ransomware has been a lot in the news recently. That's when people lock up your data, say that you have to pay a ransom to get access to it. That's an attack against the availability of your data.
Is ransomware the most prevalent form of cyber risk at this point? It feels like that's what's mostly in the news. Is that top of mind for most businesses when they try to protect themselves against cyber?
It's definitely having a moment, right? Like I feel like cyber attacks, different types of cyber attacks have shelf lives. And right now we're in sort of the cycle for ransomware. It's very profitable. And because of the business disruption, a lot of organizations want to pay. Until we see some sort of movement on deterring ransomware attacks, we think it's going to have a long shelf life. Is going to have a lot more impact.
Right. I
Mark,
guess go ahead, Lesley. Did you have something to
I was
say?
just going to add, just because when I got into cyber, I always thought of availability of data as being, like customer information, but availability of data is a lot more. Because if you think about it, different types of manufacturers operate on digitally enabled machines that operate off of data, right? So you could disrupt a machine through some kind of ransomware attack, and that's affecting the availability of data too. So I just want to make sure your listeners understand that we're not only talking about customer information, but data is everywhere.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What about denial of service? That seemed to be more popular a few years, or the popular form of cyber risk a few years ago. Is that right? Do I have that right?
That's right. Yeah, especially in the early 2000s or 2010s, I should say. People might be familiar with Anonymous, the group that had like the they had the weird videos, the voice, we are Legion, blah blah blah, etc. The industry really didn't have a good handle on denial of service attacks, which is when you send so much web traffic to a server that it can't handle the legitimate traffic, so people can't get to websites. But since then, there have been leaps and bounds in protecting websites from those sorts of attacks, and so you don't really hear about DDoS attacks as much. They happen, but they're not as impactful as they were in the early 2010s.
Right. And what about phishing? That's the other, at one point was popular. Is that still an issue? The phishing, where people kind of send you an email or text or something and entice you to click on it, and then they've infected your machine.
Yeah, phishing is a perennial risk that we see. I mean, at Moody's, at any organization basically you're working at, you're probably seeing these phishing tests where they send you a message, and then if you click on it, then you get something saying, "Oh, you fell for this phishing test." You might have to go do some extra.
That happens to Ryan all the time, Leroy.
Yeah,
it happens to him all the time.
The batting perfect for that.
I always live in fear of those because imagine if I fall for one of those and I'm on the cyber risk group, right? Like
you must be sweating all day long.
I'd be so embarrassed.
Just don't check your email. That's
the response. Yeah, that's the right answer.
Are we pretty good at people getting better at? They must be getting better. One thing I've always wondered, is it the same people that always fall for the phishing efforts? I mean, some people just can't resist. That's kind of sort of in my mind. Is that true? Is that what happens?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, organizations never want to fire somebody because they've fallen victim to a phishing attack, right? It's to raise awareness, it's to make sure people know that these sorts of threats are out there. But there have been instances where folks have so egregiously just clicked wantonly on all these things coming in. It does. Some companies have made the decision that at some point it has to affect your performance evaluations.
Yeah, I'm so paranoid now that if I see anything that I don't know exactly what it is, I send it to my IT guy and say, "Should I click on this?" And I'm thinking it would be nice for the company to have someone like that, where I could just say, "Hey, should I click on this and get an answer back? You know,
You're not aware of the button on Outlook that says phishing? You hit that.
I
it
am.
goes
Is that
right
what
to-
that's for? Am I supposed to put it over there into the? Oh, I just sent it to Gershman. Well, now Gershman's not with us anymore, but
Yeah.
to Sal, you know, and say,
Mhm.
hey, Sal, should I click on this?
I'm sure
Every-
Sal loves getting those emails.
It's the phishing clicking that is one of the most frequent methods for people who shouldn't be in the system to get into the system. And that's why companies test so much for it. And you do have a handful of employees that always fail the test.
Yeah.
When they fail the test 3 or 4 or 5 times, that's where you have to try to decide how to remedy that situation.
Okay. Any other new things coming down the pike here that you want to call out in terms of new cyber risk? I mean, all these things we talked about, ransomware, phishing, denial of service, they're all have a pretty good grip on those. We understand what they are. Are there some things out there that we just are so new that just kind of coming on the scene that we should be aware of?
I think maybe the one that you didn't mention was data breaches.
Okay.
And that's not new, but what's happening is the attackers are merging 2 different types of attacks, so ransomware and data breaches together. So they would go after you and hold you ransom and say, if you don't pay us, we will disclose all your information to the public. So it's kind of a new tool. Well, not so new anymore. It's been what, Leroy, 2 years that they've been doing this, but that's been a more potent type of attack that's come up
Interesting.
on that end.
And I think I'd add really quickly too that I think in the cyber security field, we're always sort of interested. What's the newest thing? What's the newest type of attack? But most of the attacks are pretty much been the same for a long time. They are able to use the same techniques to achieve the same end. And just like anybody else, cyber criminals are often lazy. They want to get the biggest bang for their buck by doing the easiest thing. So we want organizations are often like, hey, what's the newest, sexiest new attack? But really focusing on the tried and true methods and basic cyber hygiene practices is really where they're going to protect themselves the most.
Yeah, I think maybe what's new, and not so much in terms of types of attack, but who they're going after. They're finding ways of attacking maybe higher profile companies or companies in spaces that they didn't used to go after. So like industrial companies and energy companies. Before it was very, retail focused, banking focused. And now they're finding ways of going after different industries, which might require a more sophisticated skill set because you have to go into these kind of physical operations in order to tamper with them and cause problems.
I was just gonna say, I like to use the phrase, cyber risk is not as bad as you think it is, but it's worse than you know. And to Leslie's point, the interconnection between the information systems, the IT systems, the information technology systems, and the operations of these industrials and widget makers is something that I think we'll see a lot more focus on going forward, because you can use the IT systems to disrupt the operations. I'm thinking about temperature and flow and pressure and things of that nature that actually makes the widgets. You can disrupt them through a cyber incident through the IT system. And the Colonial Gas Pipeline story, which we're about the 1-year anniversary of that, is a great example of that.
Right. Hey, maybe we should move on. That was a very good assessment of all the different ways cyber is affecting us. And talk a little bit about the costs. Jim, you and I have been kind of having this conversation about having this cyber risk conversation in the podcast for quite some time. And I was always struggling to figure out, well, does this risk rise to a level that it becomes a broader macroeconomic problem? And can you give us some context here? How big a deal is this in the grand scheme of things in terms of the costs?
So the costs associated with a cyber event can be defined and measured in many different ways, and the costs range. So I think this morning we were emailing about the almost $1 trillion worth of global costs that you cited. There's another number that's been cited of $6 trillion. It's sort of the third largest economy if you include that. When we think of costs to a company, we call them issuers in the rating agency because anybody can issue debt. It doesn't have to be a company, it could be a project. But we think about the impact on regulatory oversight, reputational damage, lost revenue. We think of litigation, liquidity impacts, and other types of off-balance sheet liabilities or contingent liabilities that could incur. But if you add the numbers up, they can get very big. So $1 trillion is a lot of money. But if you compare it against the $22 trillion US GDP, maybe it tells you one thing. If you compare it to the global GDP, it gets very small. But if you compare that against the $2 trillion of revenue that global utilities generate every year, it becomes very large. So as we think about cyber losses, they get dispersed in a large pool, but if they get concentrated in a particular sector or a particular region or a particular asset class, that's when I think we can finally really have that discussion about the macroeconomic impacts of that.
Yeah, I think that what you're referring to is I found a citation from the Center for Strategic and International Studies that they estimated that malicious cyber attacks cost the global economy, I believe it was last year, almost $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion. And as you said, I think the U.S. GDP is, I think nominal dollars is 22 trillion. I think and then global GDP is probably about $100 trillion. So that's about 1%. But, if you think about it in the context of like climate, so if you look at I was just looking at this, if you look at the total economic cost from acute physical risk, these are, floods and hurricanes and fires, that kind of thing, comes up to about 350 billion per annum. So, that's obviously a lot, but this dwarfs that, in the grand scheme of things. And it feels like it's rising quickly, right? This doesn't feel like it's going in the other direction here. If anything, it's just going to become more and more costly.
It's rising quickly. And that's actually one of the potential statistics game is 4 trillion, 8 trillion, and 21 trillion.
Oh, okay. So we're playing the game here now.
I just want to throw that out there.
Okay. So I didn't. Oh, yeah, that's right. You wanted to play the statistics game in the conversation. So, okay. So we're going to do that. Lesley and Leroy, do you have statistics as well? No?
I prepared one if you want one, but we can. I know the answer to Jim's, so that's cheating. But I have one we can quiz Jim on later.
That's kind of sort of what Ryan does every once in a while. So that's not.
No, I'm the one trying to investigate the collusion between Zandy and Chris over there.
Okay. We're going to play the game. The game is we each state a statistic. In this case, it's got to be cyber related. And the rest of us try to figure that out based on deductive reasoning, questions and clues. So go ahead, Jim. What are the numbers again?
4 trillion, 8 trillion, and 21 trillion.
And this is cyber related.
The 21,
is it cyber related or is it your cyber related?
The 21 trillion is cyber related.
Oh, the 21 trillion is cyber related. Oh my goodness. And Lesley, you know the answer to this?
Is this a forecast over different horizons?
We looked at what sector, total debt by sector is most exposed to cyber risk, to environmental risk and social risk. So what he's telling you is $21 trillion of issued debt is highly exposed to cyber risk. 8 trillion, right? 8 trillion is social and 4 is environmental.
It's obvious Lesley doesn't understand this game. It's pretty clear.
Did I give you all the answers? Is that what I did wrong?
I mean, Lesley, what the heck,
No cowbell.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, you might have said ESG or something like that. It's like, okay, right? I'm done with this game. We're done. Okay.
Like, how is he going to get it?
You felt bad for us. That's right.
I did feel bad for you.
You're saying you guys look like idiots. I'm putting you out of your misery, is what you're saying.
Yes. Those numbers, in fairness, were in the notes that we sent about that. But to your point on 4 trillion is the amount of debt that we looked at over all the global sectors and said these are the sectors that are most exposed to environmental risk, which includes the physical effects of climate change, carbon transition, water management. 4 trillion.
Yeah.
Is at 1 trillion. Now that cyber includes the banking sector. So even if you take the $10 trillion of debt out from the banking sector in that number, you're still higher, almost twice as high as the environmental risk. And the risk is today, as opposed to the longer term horizon. The risk of environmental and climate change risk is today, but the runway is longer than it is on cyber. So that's why I threw that. And I didn't mean to jump.
No, that's a great statistic, but just so I understand, so 4 trillion in outstanding global debt that is at risk of an environmental issue, meaningful. 7 trillion is, you said, social risk?
8.
8 trillion social risk, and you said 21 trillion is cyber.
That's right. And
Okay.
the definition is high or highly exposed to that particular risk. And these are all in our heat maps that we publish.
Yeah.
So we have an environmental heat map, a social heat map, and a cyber heat map. And
By the way, for the listener, you guys wrote a great white paper that kind of went through this in detail. Is that paper available to the broad public, or is that not? Just curious. Do you know?
I don't know off the top.
Oh, no. Okay. No
I
worries.
think it would be, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great paper. It's a great paper. Okay. Okay, that's very good. I think we lost Chris. Hopefully he'll find his way back.
I think he bailed
Oh, do you think
after
so?
that number. There was a number.
I ruined the
scared
game,
him off.
left.
Yeah.
Scared him off. He's annoyed. Okay. So Lesley, you have a statistic as well?
Well, I like the idea of dimensioning cyber risk. So I was gonna
Okay.
try. It's probably an easy one for you, but or maybe a harder one for Jim. We'll see. I was gonna say if it's $1 trillion of global costs of cyber costs, what is that equivalent in terms of GDP? What European country is that equivalent to? That's for you.
Oh, I like
And
this one.
Jim,
I like this one.
what is the multiple of, or what is the multiple of Amazon revenue is that equivalent to?
Oh, that's another good one. Okay, so you're saying, okay, the estimated cost from cyber is $1 trillion globally. Which European country has annual GDP of about $1 trillion?
About $1 trillion.
Okay. Well, we're each going to name a country, and I'll let Ryan and Chris go first, unless you guys want me to go first. And Jim, do you know the answer?
Don't know the answer.
Okay, and Leroy, do you know the answer?
No.
Okay, all right, we're going to go around the horn. Okay, Chris, you go first. Oh, sorry, you can't. I don't think he looks very confused, dazed and confused.
Dazed and confused.
Ryan, what country?
Oh, here he is. Here, Chris, you can go.
Oh, did you hear
I'm
us,
having
Chris?
troubles here. Go ahead.
So Ryan, what country is $1 trillion? I think I know.
Romania.
Romania? Are you out of your mind, Romania?
I'd love to be there.
That's a bad guess, but okay. All right, Jim.
Ireland.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think so, but that's interesting. Leroy.
I'm going to say Switzerland, since Leslie's from Switzerland as well.
Yeah,
so.
you're as bad as Ryan. Yeah. Okay, Chris.
So which country has GDP?
Of
Is
$1
that
trillion.
Of $1
annually.
trillion.
You should know this, by
The
the way.
Netherlands.
That's a pretty good guess, actually. I think. I'm probably dead wrong. Lesley, is it Italy?
Chris, you got it right.
The Netherlands.
Oh, good job. Wow,
Chris.
Oh. Although I think Italy was also $1 trillion, Lesley. I'm just saying.
I think it's a little bit more than $1 trillion.
Maybe it's $1 trillion too.
Those 200
Well,
billion
no,
counts, right?
Hold it. Wait a second.
But Switzerland was 800 billion.
If it was
Is this,
2020, it would be $1 trillion. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Foreign
okay. Now
exchange
the other
rates.
one was interesting too. You said $1 trillion is what percent of Amazon annual revenue?
What multiple or percent?
Of Amazon's I think Amazon's
And
revenue. Wow, that's a great question.
Global revenue for last year.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd say it's probably got to be. Guys, you want to take a guess? I'd say 125 billion. So
What,
multiple,
Amazon's
10
revenue?
times, 10 times.
Yeah.
No? She's being very coy.
Mhm.
You're really lowballing it there, I have to say.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Times 500 billion.
Is it 500
Think
billion?
of how much
Wow.
my kids use Amazon.
That's right, Jim.
I had no idea it was that big, 500 billion.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's okay. I was going to say something about Bezos, but I'm going to practice the thumper
Mm-mm.
principle. Yeah. Okay. So I won't do that. All right. Very good. That was good. Leroy, we're going to come back to you.
Italy's
Go
GDP
ahead.
was $1 trillion back in 1990.
1990.
Oh,
Mhm.
Italy.
Italy.
Oh, I was really wrong.
Yeah, it's one.
Oh no, wait a second. Italy's GDP has not risen at all in 20 years.
It's 1.9 trillion.
Oh, is it
now.
really 1.9?
Yeah, all that tourism money from
Yeah.
Chris.
From Chris. Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the topic at hand. Hey, Jim. So, cyber is obviously a big deal. It's also strikes me as being different than other kinds of risks, right? I mean, just in lots of different ways. Do you want to give us a sense of that?
Sure. Well, so cyber is indiscriminate. It does not respect boundaries. It could affect any asset class, any sector, in any region at any time. So from that perspective, it's a little bit unique compared to some of the other risks that we think about. Cyber risk is sort of ubiquitous to an organization because it can affect your reputation and some soft factors like that, as well as hard factors like your liquidity and your revenue. It can show up in any number of ways an organization measures itself. And so from that perspective, it's also a very evolving risk. And because of the digitization that we see taking place across, industry and the economy in general, it's morphing around in novel ways. And so we're always kind of chasing around, trying to figure out how best to think about that risk, measure that risk, define that risk, and then see how that risk changes over time. It's really been an interesting journey over the last couple of years, and I feel like we finally made it, Mark, because you and I have been talking about this now like for a long time, and here it is, and so the geopolitical tensions that have taken place over in Europe right now has really amplified that risk, at least from a governmental perspective. So there's, the U.S. has shields up. We're very on a defensive footing right now to make sure that we have extra protections. And so that risk is probably going to show up in ways that are going to look creative.
Hey, when I think, Lesley, about the kind of the nexus between cyber and the broader economy, I kind of think of a few different things, and I'd like to just throw them out and get your sense of how big a deal it is. The first is around systemic financial risk, that you think about the payment processors or maybe the exchanges, that if they went down because of a cyber issue, that would be a problem. Like if I, went to use my Amex card or my MasterCard or Visa and I couldn't, that would, that'd be bad, right? That'd instill some panic. Is that, how big a deal is that? Do you think that's a big deal, systemic financial risk from cyber?
I think it's one of those key characteristics of cyber risk that we have to pay close attention to. The banks and the regulators are highly attuned to this and really focusing a lot of energy on it. But it's true that if you think about the kind of the sectors that underpin the functioning of our economy, so think about banking, think about energy, think about technology, right? Cloud. Those are all highly integrated systems that are very digitized. So like you said, if the SWIFT system goes down, it's a huge global issue. If when we did our survey,
That's the international payment system.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
When we did our survey looking at cloud computing, we reached out to about 5,000 insurers and we got 1,300 answers. And of those 1,300 folks that answered this, 87% of them said that they actually used Microsoft Azure Cloud. So think about that. If Microsoft Azure Cloud goes down, and those are folks who answered from all around the world, from all sectors of the economy. If that cloud goes down, that's another huge issue. And on energy, which is where kind of Jim spends a lot of his time, a lot of the key components that go into producing energy are manufactured by just a handful of manufacturers. So if those manufacturers get tampered with somehow, the whole energy system could be at risk as well. So it's really it's a characteristic of cyber risk that's really that can't be ignored.
So systemic financial risk. So back to the payment processors or the the exchanges or
Exchange
international payment systems.
clearinghouses.
Yeah,
Yep.
the cloud services because we're all in the cloud now, and so if that gets hacked and is taken down, that's a big problem for everybody. You mentioned energy, and that I mean, Colonial Pipeline shutdown is a good case study, good example of that, which was highly disruptive. You didn't mention global supply chains. How big a deal do you think it is for the movement of goods across the globe? Is this a big deal? Do you think is cyber a real threat there?
Yeah, I think more of that and more like almost a contagion risk concept more than systemic risk. Thinking of what happened with NotPetya, where it just spreads and start causing disruption across a whole series of industries, which spills into the supply chain.
Right. You said non-Petya. What's that?
I think Leroy is the best person, given his background, to really.
Okay.
So I guess the Cliff Notes version of NotPetya is that in 2017, in an attack that has been attributed by numerous governments, intelligence agencies, and cybersecurity research companies to the military intelligence of the Russian government, which is known as the GRU, and that they tampered with the update of the tax software that's mandated by it's an accounting company in Ukraine, and basically any entity that files taxes in Ukraine is required to use, or at least was at the time required to use, this company's accounting software. So they pushed out this software update that had been tampered with to a whole bunch of entities in Ukraine, and then those entities in turn, many of them were part of large multinationals, and it was able to spread worldwide. And it was some what we call wiper malware that basically destroyed the computers that it landed on, and it caused a number of different repercussions. I'll let Jim talk a little bit about some of the financial impact that took place as a result of that attack.
So this was another statistic we were going to use, but 8 multinational companies were affected by that NotPetya attack, and they reported about $2 billion worth of financial losses, $2 billion. And if you add up the balance sheets of those 8 companies, it was like a $350 billion balance sheet. So not a lot, again, to the point. But those 8 multinationals had 233 customers that were affected. And they reported $8 billion worth of financial losses associated with it. And again, relatively dispersed and diversified, but almost 90 of those 233 customers drew their bank lines down across 37 different banks. Now that could get, interesting very quickly. Luckily, 0 credit losses were associated with those bank draws. So it worked out. But that's a great example of contagion and interdependencies of how everything connects together and why cyber risk is so important from a macroeconomic perspective. There's a few wild cards that are in there that are floating around that we want to try to keep our eyes on.
Okay, so we mentioned systemic financial risk, the threat to the cloud, the energy system. Global supply chain doesn't seem like that's as big a direct threat. Anything else? Any other kind of major? So you're you're sitting at the White House and you're worried about cyber affecting the broader economy. Are there any other kind of choke points, stress points out there that can be exposed by a cyber attack? Anything that you would focus on or mention?
The only other one to mention, and supply chain kind of hits it a little bit, is the stuff that we use all the time. So energy, water systems, and things of that nature can be disrupted in some way, shape, or form. And when I say energy, I mean not only the fuels but the electrical power as well. And the grids are all interconnected. And as Lesley said, there's only a handful of companies that make the big components that make energy and power grids work. And so it's a concentration point.
Okay, so it doesn't feel like feels like we covered it, that there isn't anything out there that we're just not thinking about, significant vulnerability that could be exposed here.
We hit
What-
the high.
What about infrastructure? Like, right, if we took down the air traffic control system, or shut down a port or something, right?
Right.
So,
Go ahead, Leroy.
yeah, I was just going to say that the U.S. government has identified 16 sectors as being critical infrastructure sectors. And I mean, as a result, or at least what it seems as a result of the Colonial Pipeline incident that happened last May, and the geopolitical tensions in Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that there's been a lot of movement in raising the standard and raising the minimum bar for these critical infrastructure sectors. So we've seen executive orders from the Biden administration, as well as from the government agencies that oversee some of these sectors, saying you need to meet this minimum standard. You have to have somebody who's responsible for cybersecurity in your organization. You need to be doing weekly backups. Some of these very basic procedures to make sure that these critical infrastructure sectors that so much depends on, and that if something happened to them would cause a lot of hurt to the U.S. economy, have some minimum level of preparedness.
I think the psychological damage on consumers would be enormous, right? Even if you lost the air traffic control system for a day, right? How are you going to regain the trust of the public, right? That could have seen significant macroeconomic repercussions, even beyond the direct impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can think it was funny. We went through this exercise of those 16 critical infrastructure sector. We're working on an update to our heat map, and I was talking to Leroy, and we were talking about assigning systemic risk levels to the sectors. And I think we were looking at 92 sectors, Leroy, and we were mapping them, and each of one of them kind of fell in one of these 16 critical infrastructure sectors. It's very hard to kind of say like this sector is most impactful to the economy in terms of a cyber attack versus another. Everything's so interconnected. The water sector is hugely vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right, and important, but we hadn't talked about that either. It's just I think that what we're learning more and more is everybody's exposed. Last week we wrote about an attack on an agriculture company. You wouldn't think of agriculture as being exposed to digital theft, right? But it happens, and it just happens that they timed it perfectly with when planting season is.
It's almost like, as economists, we're thinking about this and how to bring cyber into our forecasting and thinking about the economy. And at this point, we're treating it more just like a cost of doing business, like any other cost. It's not like an existential threat. It could potentially be. It's a risk and maybe a scenario, but it's hard to construct a scenario where a big enough part of the economy goes down long enough for it to really take out the economy. Is that a reasonable way of thinking about it, or am I missing something?
Mark, that has been the view, I think, really since we started to put our collective heads together on this. But it reminds me of the work that's been done over the last 5 to 7 years, that because the costs associated with cyber is relatively manageable, we've only had a handful of companies that have really been permanently or lastingly impacted by cyber risks. But I think that's changing going forward. So as interconnectivity rises, as digitization increases, as the tools and methods that a hacktivist or a hacker has continues to get more dangerous in the hands of your average hacker, that the stakes at the table are rising. And so it's something to keep an eye on, those tail risks in terms of what is an unusual event, and what would happen if one of those events took place in a particular region or within a particular sector. Then I think it could change very quickly. Got it.
Okay. Hey, Leroy, one thing I find a little perplexing in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is there hasn't been more cyber, at least to my cursory, following of what events, there hasn't been much on the cyber front here, right? Is that right? And is that surprising to you as well? I thought we would see a lot more of a response. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Russia is kind of ground zero for a lot of the cyber issues that originate globally. Is that correct to say?
That is, so there's a company called Chainalysis. They do research on cryptocurrencies. And based on their research in 2021, 74% of the cryptocurrency movements connected with ransomware went to actors who are what they said Russia affiliated or Russia connected. So yeah, that is the case. And as for being surprised about the level of cyber activity in connection with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I would say yes and no. No, in the sense that there has been a lot of cyber activity. Microsoft put out a blog at the end of April saying that 6 separate Russia-aligned nation-state actors have conducted more than 237 what they call operations against various Ukrainian entities. And these includes things like destructive attacks that are impacting civilian welfare. But I think what most people were expecting are some of these splashier attacks. So, in 2015 and 2016, the Russian military intelligence again is accused of turning out the lights in various parts of Ukraine. There was a NotPetya attack again that wiped out hundreds of thousands of computers in Ukraine and around the world. So people were expecting really splashy, big scale attacks. And what we've seen have been more moderate, less splashy attacks, nonetheless impactful for people's lives. And I will say that there's been a lot of attacks back on Russia as well. Not very impactful. They've been these DDoS attacks. So people have been sending lots of traffic, web traffic to websites and services in Russia. They've been stealing tons and tons of data. One of the more higher profile ones has been the Belarusian or Belarusian cyber activists that have impacted train movements of troops. So again, not big splashy things, but there has been a significant amount of cyber activity.
Do you know there's state actors, state sponsored in some form actors in the cyber criminal activities, and then there's this private, non-government related. Is there any sense of or any data related to how much is the result of one or the other? Do we know?
Well, one of the really difficult things is that often they're the same, right? So they might wear one hat during the day. They might be a government or nation state affiliated hacker, and then they do some moonlighting in the evening, and they're financially motivated and using the same techniques or tactics that they're using in their day job to pad their pockets. Before coming to Moody's, I worked at a cyber threat intelligence company where we actually were in these communities where cyber criminals gathered to exchange tools, techniques, tactics, and also to recruit for their various cyber criminal enterprises. And yeah, it's very difficult to know exactly. Well, you don't know what their identities are. So, but there's been some investigations that have shown extensive links, particularly in some countries, between their cyber forces and cyber criminals and cyber criminal activity.
Yeah, you're a pretty interesting guy, man. Really interesting.
And Leroy, tell them how it's a business. These they have like HR departments and.
No way, really?
Payroll, payroll. There's a large ransomware gang called the Conti ransomware gang, and there was just a big leak of internal logs from that organization. Somebody was able to steal their communications and publish them. And yeah, you have people writing in saying, "Hey, I need to take some vacation time, going off with my family somewhere." Like, it is run just like a business is in many respects. It's the black market, it's underground, it's the black economy.
Hey, one other question. You may not know the answer or may not want to respond, but how empowering is crypto to cyber? Is that a big part of empowering the ability to engage in cyber attacks and get paid?
Yeah, especially for ransomware attacks, right?
Yeah.
So ransomware attacks have technically been around since the late 80s. 1989, there was AIDS ransomware that was distributed on floppy disks to AIDS researchers. But that to pay the ransom, you had to send the money to a PO box in Panama. And it turns out that when you go show up to pick up stolen funds or ransom funds, that you can be found, and that person, the author behind that attack, was caught and put in jail. When you get the advent, or at least when cryptocurrency started taking off in the early to mid 2010s, then it became much more feasible for ransomware attacks to happen. And so that's when you started seeing ransomware attacks against individuals in the like $300 to $400 amount range. And then as time has gone on, it's gone into like the tens of millions of dollar range as they got more sophisticated and more targeted in their attacks.
Yeah, and what's super interesting about these ransom payments is, and these criminal organizations, is they're largely very disciplined. They take this money and they reinvest it in their business to develop more sophisticated weaponry. So going back to that $1 trillion amount, it's a lot of R&D, right?
Oh, geez. That's scary. That thought of that is just really scary. Oh, goodness. Now, I assume some countries are just better positioned to manage through this than others. I kind of hope the U.S. is in a good position, but Jim, is that the case? And what makes one country more susceptible or more impervious to cyber risk than others?
To some degree, everybody is on somewhat of a level playing field in the sense that we're all using the same internets and those types of capabilities. But there's a clear difference between the resources that are available for some of the developed countries versus some of the more emerging countries that are out there. The United States, in particular, is very forward-leaning on both offensive and defensive capabilities. We've very sophisticated thinking around this, and we continue to work with our friends and allies on that.
Yeah, I was reading, I think in Foreign Affairs, I can't remember, it was around cyber issues, and one of the points being made was that the U.S. is somewhat insulated because the cyber criminals are fearful of retaliation from the United States, so that limits the attacks on the U.S. to some degree, or at least the severity of the attacks. Does that ring true to you? Does that sound right?
I'm not sure how much that sounds right. I'm thinking about, I think a lot of the inbound is in the U.S. and maybe that's, just a function of our society. But I'm not how, go ahead, Leroy.
Yeah, I'll add really quickly that, for cyber criminals, especially financially motivated ones, they have this line that they're trying to walk. They don't want to cause too much of a splash, because then that will bring the full force and might of the U.S. government down on them. So you think about, we keep referencing the Colonial Pipeline incident. In that case, because it became such a splashy attack, the cyber criminals themselves came out and said, "Oh, we didn't know it was so important. We didn't mean to hit a pipeline, right? Like, please back off." We've heard from some victims of ransomware attacks that are hospitals that they contact the ransomware gang and say, "Hey, we're a hospital," and the ransomware gangs give them the decryption key and say, "Hey, we're sorry. Please tell the FBI or whatever that we gave you the key," because they don't want the heat.
Empathetic cyber criminals. Yeah, right. That's great.
Self-interested cyber criminals.
Yeah, self-interested. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a business, as you said, so they're doing risk management, right? So
exactly,
like any other good business, they're trying to manage the risks that they face. Good. Again, back to the report you guys did. I thought it was fabulous, and obviously represented a lot of work, all the survey work that you did. Hey, Lesley, based on that, are there some things you learned that businesses should be doing, could be doing, or not be doing that would make them more resilient to managing through cyber threats and risks?
Well, I guess the first thing I say is we're like as a rating agency, not in the business of giving cyber defense recommendations.
Okay.
So all I can
Good
do
point.
is
Yes.
talk to, again, financial background, but I can talk to some of the findings. What we learned from the folks that we were able to survey and who generously donated their time to answer us. Largely, it seems like they're tuned to cyber risk, and there's a cyber operations that are being created within the issuers that we surveyed. That means that they have a cyber manager, and they have a couple of cyber folks working full-time within their organization. And largely, they're doing the very bare minimum of what's called cyber hygiene, using multi-factor authentication, scanning their systems. But once you start looking at more advanced forms of ways to mitigate the risk, then you start seeing a very disparate set of responses based on sectors. Banking seems to be way ahead of the pack across the board in terms of how they look at how they govern cyber, in terms of how they manage it from an operational standpoint on a day-to-day basis, and even from a risk transfer standpoint. On the other end of the spectrum, not surprisingly, the public sector is lagging.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Was that?
I mean, it's costly, right? It's a cost center. So you have limited ways you can allocate resource, and cyber is oftentimes the one that, is probably not the primary focus.
Got it. Well, that's not very, that's pretty disconcerting that the public sector is so exposed. I guess not surprising as you point out. What about risk mitigation here on cyber? Is there a way companies can use the insurance markets or some other form of risk transfer that, to make this, again, because it feels like this is at this point in time more of a cost of doing business. So if there's a way to kind of quantify that and compartmentalize it, then you can transfer the risk and make it more manageable. Is that right, that thinking? And is there any efforts along those lines? Is that even a possibility around the cyber risk?
Yes. So there's this thing called standalone cyber insurance, or cyber insurance for short, which is quite popular. I think in our survey, I want to say about 80%, 85% of the folks that responded said they carried some form of cyber insurance. That always sounds good, and there's some financial benefit to it, but the policy coverages are actually quite small. But where the rest of the benefit is that you get access to a lot of third-party services. So if you're attacked, you suddenly have access to experts that can help you with, negotiating with the criminals, facilitating the cryptocurrency payments, and doing all sorts of forensics. And that's an added benefit. It's not necessarily direct financial, but it's avoidance of cost, I guess. That's beneficial, but it's a very dynamic market. And maybe Leroy can kind of jump in here, talk about what's happening in the cyber insurance market, because it's changing rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good circle back to my stat. So
good. Great. I was going to ask about that because I had not forgotten, Leroy. I was going to come back, but do you want to do your stat?
Sure, I'll do my stat, and you have a good hint already that it's something related to cyber insurance.
Yeah.
And the number is 300%.
300%. Is that the increase in the outstanding amount of risk that's insured over the past 10 years? No, past 5 years.
Nope.
Okay, can you give us a hint?
Well, okay, is it the increase in premiums?
Oh,
that's it. Year over year.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
Wow.
Or some of the hardest hit.
Way to go, Jim. Hey, Ryan, that is a cowbell moment.
All right, I got to get it.
Yeah.
Hold on.
That's a cowbell moment. Very good. That's great, Jim. Fantastic. 300% from like what to what? Do you know?
That's year over year for some of the hardest hit by ransomware sectors. So that includes things like education, government, and manufacturing.
Oh no, wait! I thought that's the increase in the premium.
Premium, exactly. Year over year, the increase in premium.
The premium last year was $10,000, and this year was 300%, $30,000.
Yeah,
Something
exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
Oh my
And at the
gosh.
same time, the coverage is shrinking for some of these hardest hit sectors, because when you have to remember that cyber insurance for a long time was focused primarily on first errors and emissions, and then on data breaches, and those do not have the same sort of loss magnitude as ransomware attacks have had. And one of the biggest drivers of that impact is the business interruption that comes from that. And so the insurance companies, they just weren't ready for it. And they experienced heavy losses. Wasn't profitable for a number of cyber insurers, and some have even exited the cyber insurance market because they decided it's just not they can't
Can't make
continue
the
to carry it.
return.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Hey, Ryan and Chris, did you guys come up with statistics? Did you have a statistic you wanted to throw out to the group?
I have
Chris,
one.
did you?
Well,
You have
Chris
one?
can go first. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, go
Chris,
ahead,
yeah.
Ryan.
And then I want to end on a high note. I'm going to ask each of you guys, give me some good news, okay? Please, some good news. Okay. All right, Chris, what's your number?
1834.
1834.
Yep.
Not the date, not the year 1834.
It is a year.
Huh.
It is the year 1834.
Yes.
Are you kidding me? 1834.
Yep.
1834.
That might be the worst stat ever used.
Is that
And it's
something-
related to, hold it, wait. It's related to cyber, right?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, is 1834 the name of a form of hacking?
Nope.
Okay. Is 1834 the name of a criminal cyber group?
No. No.
I think there was some event that happened in 1834.
Yes. There
Well,
you
there's
go.
events, of course, events in 1834, but cyber related.
But it was, I think it was some sort of information manipulation, or
Oh,
am I on the right track?
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently. Oh, you want me to, you give up?
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I give up.
All right. Apparently, the French telegraph system was hacked in 1834,
Ah.
and
Oh, that's pretty good. That's good.
that might have been the first cyber attack in history.
Mon Dieu. Leroy gets a bell, Ryan.
yeah.
Come
He
on.
does. He
Leroy
definitely
gets a
does.
bell. That's pretty darn good.
That's impressive.
That is impressive. Yeah. All right. Very good. And Chris, Ryan, what is yours? What's your number?
5% to 35%.
5% to
To 35.
35%.
Mhm.
Okay. So it's a range
It's a range.
and it's cyber related.
It is.
Do you guys know any guys, any guesses? Can you give us a hint without giving it away?
We kind of touched on it on some
Did
of
we
the
really? Okay.
interconnected.
Probability of a cyber event, major cyber event in the next year.
Nope. No.
The percent of people who fail phishing tests in by sector, by industry. 5% is the low, 35% is the high. No.
No. I'll give you one more hint.
Okay.
This estimate comes from the Federal Reserve.
Oh, that's interesting.
Cost to businesses or consumers.
Cyber cost is a percent of sales.
Yeah.
No, it's actually the amount of the impact on the Fed's payment system. 5% to 35% of the payment system would be down if one financial institution was hacked.
Oh,
No, that's interesting.
that's a good one.
That is a good
Yeah.
one. That's a good one. Yeah. So
Scary.
just to
So
say
we
that
need
one more
some good news.
time. If,
So
if a,
5% to 35% of the Fed's payment system would go down if there's one attack on a financial institution, one of the
major,
banks.
it's got to be a
Yeah,
major.
the
fund.
major
major.
one.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Is that
does
the
sound like a
Dallas
system.
Fed did that, Ryan?
Maybe I gotta double check. I forget.
Okay, that was good. Excellent. All right, so good news. Any good news here, guys? Let's go around the group from MIS. Jim, any good news?
There is good news.
Okay.
The good news is you don't have to be a cyber technician to understand cyber risk. And we see more and more companies adopting the cyber into the traditional risk management frameworks that these companies operate under. Because cyber risk is an enterprise-wide risk. It does reside at the board of directors or the trustees and things of that nature. And so we see CFOs getting more involved in making sure that they have the ability to talk about cyber in the same dollars and cents way that they talk about other risks. And they are making estimates on losses, and they are making estimates on investments, which may or may not have, revenue growth or volume growth associated with it, but certainly has volume protection or revenue protection associated with it. And so they're moving in the direction of being able to articulate that through the traditional rate risk management systems that they have. I think that's a really good piece of news.
That is, I'm on a couple boards, and I'll have to say, hyper vigilant about cyber risk of all the risks. And I'm not sure it's even rational how sensitive we are to cyber, given all the other risks that we face. But that's the one thing you just don't want to happen, is that have a ransomware threat. So very, very, it goes through auditing, have auditors come in, take a look at your processes, making sure that there's no gaps or no holes, making sure that we're filling any holes as rapidly as we can. So that, just based on my very limited experience, it feels like, U.S. companies and businesses are really focused on this as an issue. Yeah. Leroy, any good news? Oh,
Yes.
And coming from you, this really means something.
So my piece of good news is that based on the results from our cyber survey, most of the vast majority of the organizations that we spoke with are implementing the basic cybersecurity practices. So again, things like weekly backups, having an incident response plan, using multi-factor authentication. And that's really good news, because the majority of cyber attacks that are happening are basic, and they can be thwarted using these basic techniques. And so it's good to see that there's such a widespread adoption.
That's my wife slinking back here, just so you know. That's a good one. That's a really good one. And Lesley, lead us out with really, really good news.
Great. So what I would say is there's new SEC guidance out there for cyber risk disclosure, which means that we should start getting more data about these cyber events, which was, in our view, very positive. As we get more data, we can do better modeling. Better modeling means better decision making. So there's a big movement towards more integrating cyber risk quantification, so that you can kind of estimate your dollars at risk based on different types of scenarios. And then you can prioritize your investments in cyber, which should lead to much better outcomes going forward.
When are we going to get more SEC information from the SEC? Do you know? When's that?
They are in the review period right now. I believe the review period ends in June.
Okay.
And
Great.
Part of the guidance that they put forward is that you need to disclose material cyber attacks within 4 days of determining that they are material.
Great. Well, that's encouraging. Yeah, that is good news. So, okay, we covered a lot of ground here. Anything that you think we missed? Just kind of an open-ended question, just in case I didn't miss any. I missed something that we should talk about. Anything, Jim, Leroy, Lesley, Chris, Ryan? Anything? No. Okay. All right.
I have one question.
Yeah, fire away.
Good question. Economics related. And I don't think there's a known answer here. Do you think that cyber attacks go up or down in recessions? Are they pro-cyclical or counter-cyclical?
That's interesting.
I'm going to go with they're going to go up.
Like all crime, right? Probably.
Like all crime.
I think crime actually goes down in recession, right? People are at home, right? There's property crime maybe. But.
Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah. Oh, I thought, okay, that's interesting. So your instinct is that they'll go up in the downturns, just as a source of income, revenue. Yeah.
And it's just also because the trend has been up and it continues to go up, I think,
Right.
Okay. So there's no connection then. It's just.
It might be disconnected. Yeah.
Might be disconnected. Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank you guys for spending so much time with us and really appreciate it and learned a lot and looking forward to your next study. It sounds like you're got a lot of work here ongoing and you're doing a lot of really great work. So thank you for that. And with that, we're going to call this a podcast. Thank you, everyone.